Hi, Lois.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
I'm really good. It's so nice
Good
to
to see
see you.
you.
I
Good
think
to
it's our
see you
first
too.
episode of
Oh,
2026,
oh my
right?
gosh, it is. I can't believe it. This is actually our second year. What, didn't we start a little bit
Yeah.
later into 2025? So yeah, so we've made it and we've had lots of great episodes. It's been such a great experience meeting so many amazing women.
It has been indeed. So, season two, I'm so excited, kicks off
Yeah.
with an amazing guest. I
Yeah.
don't know if I've shared this with you, but my daughter is a librarian and in
Okay.
an academic institution. So, academics are very close to my
Oh.
heart and researchers in particular. So, tell us who we've got today.
Yes. Well, we have Dr. Emma Connolly. She's a research fellow in politics, amazingly, at University College in London. I'm sure lots of things to talk about with what's going on in politics. So, how about we bring Emma on the stage to have a
Great.
quick chat? Hello, Emma.
Hi, good
Welcome. Good
morning.
afternoon.
Hello.
So,
Nice to meet you both.
yes, so good to meet you, and thank you for joining us. This is going to be a very interesting discussion because we're talking about not necessarily so much about politics, but how women are really represented in social media. So this is going to be a fascinating discussion. So Haley, I think we'll see you on the back end of the discussion, and
Sounds
we'll
great.
talk
Looking
soon.
forward to it.
All right. So um, looks like we lost Emma. There she is. All right. So Emma, I have to say this is an interesting area and you have not only are you a research fellow, but you have a PhD in this topic. So how did you, I guess if you could describe what your area of study and research is and why did you go down this path? What was kind of your passion that drove you down this path?
Yeah, well, I'll start just a little bit with my research. So, yeah, like you say, I'm a research fellow in politics. So my main area is the spread of political narratives on social media platforms, primarily focused on kind of electoral politics, UK, US elections. Looking at the spread of kind of any form of political speech online. I'm not from a traditional tech background though, but I have always been like really interested in the way that we communicate, like the way that language evolves, the way that like power dynamics shift. Um, so yeah, I've always been interested in that in kind of a social context. And I always intended to pursue it further. And then when COVID hit, I had a bit of time to kind of sit and reflect. And I thought, you know what, I'm actually going to kind of pursue this a bit further and I'm going to do this. I am going to do my PhD. And you can't really look at communication and politics without looking at social media.
Mm.
Because like it's the way that everybody communicates now, and that includes at a kind of a elite political level as well. So that's what I focused my PhD on. I kind of primarily looked at X as a platform, but obviously that's evolved massively. And now I look at TikTok, which is going to be the focus of kind of today's exploration into the representations of women, Instagram, and Reddit as well.
Wow. So that's quite, you're right. That is the way that we do communicate these days, right? It is so much. And it really does create I don't know, both a positive and probably some negative connotations, especially when it comes to, you said you dove into this topic about gender and how women, are being represented in social media, especially in tech, because as we all know, the number of women who've really been able to get good positions and senior leadership positions in tech. We're just not as represented as we would love to be. And I wonder, how does social media play into that, and why did you go into that sort of a thread?
Yeah, well, obviously, the relationship between like politics, society, and like AI and gender is like so fascinating, and it's like super complex. We could spend a whole day like talking about
Mm.
it, but you're right to pick up on the positives and negatives. I feel like in some ways, social media has kind of really changed the space of like representation for women in lots of different ways. Maybe in the last decade, like if you think back to like the cultural movements of like Me Too and like the hashtag engagement that generated,
Mm.
like I think there is a sense that kind of these platforms can shift not just representations, but like the hierarchies that are kind of already implemented in society, and provides a way to challenge that. But on the flip side, like if you think about AI, for example, you know, women, the harmful consequences of that, I feel like are disproportionately kind of targeted at women. If you think about conversations about like deep fakes and all of the kind of harmful narratives that go alongside that. So yeah, you're right, and it really is like a double-edged sword in some ways. And I think for me, like the foray into really looking at like perceptions of women in tech was a bit of a personal journey. Like as a scientist, I had to upskill like certain elements of my practice, and one of those like coding and the technical requirements behind that. So I was going to lots of digital workshops, tech workshops, online courses, and despite kind of, I guess, the societal focus on encouraging more women into tech spaces, like that wasn't what I was seeing. Like I was kind of seeing like, oh, I'm like one of two women here, or like there was definitely a sense from my perspective that kind of equality like wasn't there. So that got me thinking, like if I was younger, I felt like this visibility discrepancy would be a real issue for me. And I'd want to see people like me in roles that I could see myself working or researching in. So yeah, that was kind of what inspired me then to go and have a look at these representations.
Yeah, and so, I mean, it's interesting because the way we communicate and the way that women communicate different than men, I think, has always been part of the challenge because, you know, if you have a room full of men in a meeting and the way that, you know, they communicate or expect people to communicate versus how women do, sometimes it leads to some of the challenges is why women don't really get that voice that, you know, they want to have or deserve to have in order to get their points of view across. So did you find that also then in social media and online? Was there this disparity? And, you know, what were some of the findings that you saw when you were looking into that?
Well, first of all, like I just wrote down some statistics because I was like, just to get a scale of kind of what people were engaging with. The hashtag Women in Tech has over the last 10 years experienced a 300% increase in usage overall. On TikTok, Women in STEM has received over 1 billion views in 2024. So the amount of engagement on these platforms from women is really significant, and that gives us a like really rich and publicly available data to kind of really get a sense of what's going on in these spaces. So in terms of some of the key findings, we kind of looked at them thematically. So one of the key ones is like using humor, like women using humor as a tool for highlighting inequality. So there was like this dual kind of narrative of like, on one hand, like empowerment, like using these spaces or using TikTok in particular, because this research was done on TikTok, using TikTok as a platform to like call out perceived inequalities or to highlight perhaps perceived grievances from hiring practices or like treatment in workplaces. But on the flip side of that, that was often done in a kind of a humorous sense, like almost self-deprecation, which really kind of in terms of communication really kind of fits with the style of social media use anyway. But I thought that was really interesting. It was like a really kind of clever way of almost like flipping that narrative and using it as kind of an empowerment tool. The other thing that kind of really stood out was using TikTok as a learning space. So things like how-tos, cheat codes, hacks for a range of things. So for nailing an interview, for networking well, for like using it to kind of how to, you mentioned kind of talking in meetings and things like that, how to communicate in the workplace, like things to say. So I think there was a real sense of, like platforms being used as a learning space, and also one of kind of empowerment as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because I think when you don't have many women, let's say, around you, physically around you in a work environment, you sometimes can feel a little bit isolated. Who's my network that I can lean on? I can either from a mentoring perspective or just simply to engage with, to kind of give you that boost of I don't know, power or energy to be yourself and to kind of take that forward and feel confident. It's a confidence booster when you have more people like you, whether it be women or people like you in personality or style, to be able to take that forward. So it seems like social media has been a way to, for women especially, to gain some of that. They can hear from others who they may not know or cross paths with, and hear some of their insights in that kind of cheeky way. So is it then in the business world, is this something we need to use more often? I mean, we're on LinkedIn Live right now, and we're using social media as a way to be able to communicate and share ideas for others. Is it something that we, from a business world, need to take advantage and use it as a way to give women more representation and support?
Yeah, I really do think so. And I think in some ways, like, we kind of need to shift the way that we think about platforms, or the way that businesses like think about platforms. Like when we talk about all the things we've just spoken about, like visibility, aspiration, accessibility, like opportunity, like these things are playing out in social media spaces, but they're also playing out in the workplace as well. And we've already said that social media shapes whose voices are heard and whose aren't, and what is seen as achievable and what isn't, and what barriers persist. And ultimately, when we think about like TikTok specifically, it's a place that is predominantly used by young women. And I think it's ultimately where young women form their sense of what a career in tech or digital or STEM looks like. So I think it is really important for like companies to kind of tap into that. They can't control the narratives that are going on, but they can and should understand the things that women are saying about their careers and about their aspirations and about the challenges that they face. And in that sense, I think it kind of turns social media into like a really powerful listening tool. And I would say to businesses that your next generation of female leaders are digital natives. Like this is where they are consuming a huge amount of their information relating to employment, relating to the workplace, relating to the types of careers that they know are available. And we know tech and AI and STEM is like a hugely evolving field, and really rapidly. So I would say that these young women are already using TikTok and other platforms to connect, empower, subvert societal expectations. So I think the onus is on companies to try and use that and to try and understand it, to improve their practices of also encouraging more women to be in that workspace.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, if it's not, I mean, I know LinkedIn is often used, but I don't think you've even mentioned LinkedIn that much when you consider young women. I know I have a daughter who's she's just entering the workforce, and she doesn't spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. She spends a lot of time on all the other platforms. And so you're right, if for a business to really tap into, not only to understand who their target is as to who they want to have join their company, they need to look at other avenues to get attention from young women to see what that career opportunity might be. So as a young woman who's entering the workforce or early in her career, how should she use social media? Like what are the types of things that she should consider? Is it, I guess, a way to really take advantage of social media? Do you have any recommendations for young women and how they should utilize the platforms out there, either both to stay away from maybe, as well as how they can take advantage of it maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, obviously social media in a sense of like Instagram, TikTok, those kind of platforms offer something different to like a more formal employment or kind of more formal networking site like LinkedIn. I think what you get from social media is a form of authenticity, and a form of like an exposure to like authentic experiences that maybe you don't get on somewhere like LinkedIn, which is a bit more polished. It's a bit more performative, whereas on, you know, on other platforms, I think there is a sense that it's a bit more, I mean, certainly some of the data that we saw, that yes, there is some kind of romanticism, but like it also very much discusses the realities that you might not get on other platforms. So I would say to kind of really use those platforms to listen to people who are currently in those roles and in those careers that you want to aspire to, because it isn't, you know, it's not all about the positives, and it's not all about kind of companies presenting themselves as these kind of polished, you know, perfect places to work, but that there are challenges and barriers that people have had to overcome to get there. So I think that is really important. I think also in a sense of building connections, obviously, like places like LinkedIn are like a really good way of doing that, because that's the whole point of it. But I would say, like, I wouldn't underestimate, and we see this like in a political sense as well, like I wouldn't underestimate the like serious work I think that social media platforms can do. I like, if we think of like, again, TikTok, like, yes, it's funny and it's entertaining and it's a place, you know, you can kind of switch your brain off for a little bit, but there's a lot of conversation and narratives that are happening there that can, like, for a young woman, can give them a step up into entering the career that they want. One of the things that I found particularly interesting is like the type of jobs that people were talking about that I hadn't even heard of. And like, I wrote down a couple of examples, like a computational pharmacologist, AI ethics and governance officer, and also like a real emerging space in like the blending of tech and wellness. So I feel like, as a young woman, where is that really important kind of career aspiration coming from? Because these are not the kind of careers that are necessarily being talked about in school, for example, or, you know, the field is evolving so quickly that social media is a space that can keep up with that, and therefore offers a really interesting insight, not just into like women in tech now, but also like how that might look in the future.
Well, I mean, and to that point, roles are changing considerably with AI, right? In any business, whether it be in whatever industry it might be in, there's new roles that are being created, like ones that you just talked about around AI governance, or, you know, to be able to create the best prompts to go into ChatGPT or whatever that might be, right? They're very much evolving. So it seems like businesses need to think about, as their workforce needs to change and have a much more dynamic sort of a workforce who are able to adjust and to find the right skill sets, they really need to creatively think about how to use social media. It seems like there's a real opportunity to not only find the best talent who are the most creative, and also, like you said, there's roles that are new and popping up that they need to be able to tap into that and figure out how to best, tap into that sort of talent. So how should businesses rethink or kind of rewire a little bit in their talent acquisition and how they manage that?
Yeah, I think one of the things is maybe like looking at their hiring processes. I think, I mean, just to echo, really what you've just said, like some of the activity, and also I would say, before I kind of go into your question, that what we saw on TikTok was not just like passive conversation, it was real like active stuff, like okay, like this is what I did to my CV, and like this is how I reworked this to get this interview, and this is what I said in this context. So there was a real sense of like actively trying to like give advice to other people rather than just kind of having these passive conversations. But the hiring process was particularly interesting because there was a sense that the platform was kind of being used as a serious space for like navigating this process. And I think women sharing their contacts, their tips for hiring, and kind of getting promotions, like the prevalence of that activity on the platform, I kind of thought that reflects that there's still an inequality, or like at least a perception of inequality in those hiring processes. Maybe like the fact that I think perhaps women still see themselves at a disadvantage, or perhaps less likely to get a position. And I do think that that's a flag for companies. Like if they want to attract the best talent, exactly as you said, if you want to attract up and coming entrepreneurial, creative individuals, then I think that is a sign to be like, okay, well, is that a barrier to them applying to this company because they think maybe that this process is not for them? But on the flip side of that, businesses themselves could also be using platforms to communicate and to engage with young women. If I were CEO of a tech company, like I would certainly be doing that. At the very least, I'd be using it to get a sense of the perceptions of young women. But I also think it does have practical utility, especially in that hiring process.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's really important, and I think we're all learning to, as someone who also hires folks working with my talent department, the way you represent yourself as a company also is very important, and how you write the job description of the type of person that you're looking for is very important, because we needed to go through a kind of an overhaul ourselves, because we realized after we were reading it, it was really skewing us to a certain type of candidate, which might have been very traditional, a little bit more older school. And you have to really think about the kind of talent to, like you said, if you want someone who's highly creative, someone who really does well in today's world that's, constantly in a very dynamic sort of an environment, that's a different kind of a skill that you're looking for. So what you're saying is social media really has a role to play in that, because it keeps you in tuned to what that great talent is looking for, if we can kind of keep our eyes on that ball and understand what that workforce is actually looking for.
Yeah.
And we can find that there.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the other thing is, I think there are companies who, well-intentional, and I think they do have these kind of like pushes to get women into the workplace, but do they know that aligns with the conversations that are happening amongst young women themselves? I think sometimes it's these well-intentioned initiatives, are they authentic? Do they accurately reflect the types of, or do they adequately address, or at least try and address, the same challenges and barriers that like young women are actually facing, or are they more performative and kind of there to like more on a surface level? So I think social media is a really rich space for kind of getting a sense of making sure that the actions you put in place, or you do as a company, align with what your target audience are saying about that exact situation.
It's interesting and very important for all of us and who are on the hiring side, but also a great channel and a great avenue for many young people, women and men, who are looking to figure out how they get into the workforce and what they're looking for. It's an important channel too, and they're the experts, I will say. So this has been a great conversation, and as you know, we always ask our prior guests to ask a question of our future guests to, as a thread throughout our episodes. And our prior guest, who was Maya J from last year, she's a software engineer at Results CX. She's in India, and she had a question for you. She said, given that you have had exposure to so many forums, is there any really fun or memorable event that you experienced that taught you something or was instrumental in your journey? And I think just based on our conversation, because she's a young woman and she wants that authentic, interesting experience that you had, which kind of goes back to what social media is about, right? Is sharing those interesting experiences that you have. So anyway, I thought that was very in tune to what she's thinking. But do you have an interesting experience you can share?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure like how much of a fun experience this is, but like, I obviously, when you're like researching on platforms, you're kind of obviously absorbing all of the conversations that are happening, and like I feel like it's also shifted the way the kind of narratives that I've seen have shifted the way that I think about kind of my role in like the workspace and in my job. So I think, yeah, like it's kind of a memorable, I guess, takeaway that I realized I was spending kind of more energy and time and headspace, like trying to look like I belonged in the spaces that I was working in. And I was spending so much energy and time on that maybe I wasn't really enjoying the job that I was doing. And I would consider myself to have like a pretty cool job, and like some of the things that we research are pretty cool. So I remember thinking like, oh, I don't sound like everyone else, like I didn't come from the same route, I don't have the right background, like all of these things that I feel specifically women are kind of conditioned to think at some point in their careers. But then I kind of thought, well, actually, this is an advantage. It's okay for a career to be like non-linear. I think again, like it's kind of women, we feel pressure to conform to this. Like, I need this career and I need it by then, and like I need to do this, and this. But I think one thing that I've taken away, like one memorable thing that I've taken away from this research is like that's not the case at all. Like people come from lots of different backgrounds, like they've come into tech from lots of different routes, and they're all doing amazing things. So like just like have confidence in where you've come from and what you're doing, rather than worrying too much about everything that's all the noise that's kind of going on around you and distracting you from that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, because I think and it takes time for this to soak in, I think, in our careers, but once you realize that I'm different than potentially everybody in the room or everybody in that team, but the reason I'm there is because I'm different, right? To that point, even though it might be a different way or it might feel uncomfortable, you're usually there for a purpose, and you take that as an advantage than as a challenge. So I think once we can, adopt that as women, I think that's what will really turn the corner for many of us.
It definitely takes time to see it as an advantage. I think it's like that's a kind of a process, but I have found, kind of looking at all like these other women kind of telling their stories and hearing their voices. It's just been like super interesting and really
good. Cool. Good. Well, the last question I have for you is, do you have a question for our next guest? So our next guest is Shiva Preeta Jay. She is from LTI Mindtree, and she is the head of sustainability platforms. And she's our winner of our Digital Innovator Award last year for the APAC region. So she's going to have amazing stories. And I know she has a lot of ambition when it comes to sustainability. But do you have a question for her?
I do have a question. And as we've been talking about kind of the future of like women in tech, I think a good question would be, what is one piece of advice that you would have given to your younger self? Or what is one thing that you wished you had known?
Amazing question. And really thought-provoking. So great question. All right, let's bring Haley back on the stage.
Great conversation, you two. I loved it. I wrote something down that I had never thought about before, which is two things. Flipping the script on the narrative around social media and all of the harms, and really amplifying the good things that women can tap into on social media, the learning that you talked about, Emma, and for employers and people in the workforce, leveraging social media as a listening tool. I had never thought about that before. I tend to avoid places like TikTok because I get sucked in and waste time, but leveraging it as a listening tool to really understand what young women are talking about on the platform with respect to their careers and particularly their careers in tech. I found that fascinating. So time to download TikTok again, I guess.
I think I will just say, like, you can't ignore the harms. Like, I mean, there's a whole, I mean, they're based in the UK at the moment. There's like a whole conversation about like banning social media for like under 16s. I know they've done it in other countries as well. So like, that's not to say that like everything is all rosy in any sense. But I do think that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be trying to find positive ways of getting people's voices heard that are not necessarily the ones that are always heard. And I think in that sense, like, there's a real kind of positive shift that we can do as society, not just in like work in the workplace and not just in tech spaces, but in society in general. And I do think that is really important.
Yeah, which is, I think, why we're all here today, so that we could hear your point of view and be able to incorporate that on our platform. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
And we learned a lot, and thank you again. And thanks to our audience for joining us for another week. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.